For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. I joke a lot on this channel about something that I like to call the Shaggy Defense. For those who don't know what that is, in 2000, Shaggy released a song called It Wasn't Me, and that song was a massive hit. It hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. The premise of the song is hysterical. A man is caught cheating on his significant other, and all the evidence is stacked against him. She walked in on him, she has video evidence and caught it on camera, and she saw him getting it on while on the sofa. Panicked, the singer in this, Rick Rock, asked Shaggy for advice on how to get out of this situation, and Shaggy responds by saying, "Just say it wasn't you." Anytime she asks a question and accuses you of doing something, and accuses you of being unfaithful, and says that she saw you do it, and has proof with her eyes and with the camera, just say, "It wasn't me." It's the Bart Simpson "I didn't do it" defense. Obviously, this defense is really bad. It almost never works. Just saying "I didn't do it," even though people literally saw you do it, and even though all the evidence is stacked against you, is quite the claim. It's like if someone calls me out for making that video on Depressed Ginger, and says that I never should have made that vid, and that I'm a horrible person for doing so. And my rebuttal and my defense of that is, I didn't make that video. It wasn't me. You've got the wrong guy. Like, you can see how this defense is extremely flimsy, right? Which is why today, I want to talk about one time that it actually worked. Seriously. Because this player right here is a wide receiver on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers by the name of Theo Bell. And in 1982, he was about to be in a whole heap of trouble. His name was out there as a man who did something illegal, and his football career was potentially going to be in jeopardy as a result, because this was a serious offense, and this was not his first rodeo. And Bell's response to this, despite all the evidence seemingly being against him, nope, it wasn't me. And it actually, amazingly enough, worked, and resulted in a lawsuit that has to be seen to be believed. Because this is the story behind Theo Bell, and what might just be, considering the circumstances, the strangest arrest in the history of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers franchise. Before I talk about the actual arrest in question, we need some context to understand who the player is, how good he was, and what his prior history was with incidents like this. The year is 1981, and this man right here, Theo Bell, finds himself playing wideout with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for the first time ever. Going into 1981, it seemed like a guarantee that Bell was going to be playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was their top punt returner and was coming off of his best season ever. For the past 2 seasons, he finished inside the top 8 of the league in punt return yards, and in 1980, averaged 10 yards per punt return, which ranks 6th in the NFL amongst all qualified players. And he was a solid receiver for Pittsburgh in many ways, finishing that 1980 season with 29 catches for 748 yards and 2 touchdowns, averaging well over 25 yards per catch. In fact, Bell actually led the team that year in receiving yards. It wasn't Lynn Swann or John Stallworth or anyone along those lines. It was Theo Bell. However, after a contract dispute where he held out, the Steelers decided to just outright waive him. It's a bit more complicated than that, but that's a story for another time. Long story short, Steelers head coach Chuck Noll, who you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, said on Bell, "This type of relationship has to be built on trust. How can you count on somebody who walks out? If you don't show up, then you have options. Nobody forces you to show up." With that, Bell found himself on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, hoping to help out an offense that did not have a 700-yard receiver in 1980 and finished 23rd out of 28 teams in points scored. And while Bell didn't quite reach the heights that he did in Pittsburgh during that 1980 season, he still had a decent campaign and one of the best years of his career, finishing the year with 21 catches for 318 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was one of 3 players on the Bucs to have multiple receiving touchdowns, and outside of Kevin House, who had an incredible season with over 1,100 yards, he was, without a doubt, the best wide receiver on that team. And because of his efforts, the Buccaneers made it to the playoffs for the second time in franchise history, where they won the NFC Central before falling at the hands of the Dallas Cowboys in the divisional round. And even if the stats didn't show it, the Bucs probably don't make the playoffs without Bell. He knew what it meant to be on a winning team, having won 2 Super Bowls with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and knew what it took to win games late in the season. And the Bucs turned to him for guidance. Said Bell prior to their winner-take-all battle in Week 16 against the Detroit Lions to win the division, "They all think I've been in this situation so many times before, and I have. I just try to keep them fired up, keep telling them they can do it. I tell them that I played with guys in Pittsburgh who were no better than they are, and that all you have to do is put it in your mind and heart to get the job done." Bell was a contributor both on and off the field in many ways. Don't get me wrong, the Bucs still needed wide receiver help, but Bell was, at the very least, a solid rotational piece that seemed like he could be counted on for years to come in terms of being in the lineup. However, it seemed like all of that was potentially going to change a few months later during the 1982 offseason, when Theo Bell found himself in some hot water. In fact, he found himself in a ton of hot water. The end of February into March was not his month, and that's putting it lightly. On February 25th, he was arrested for drunk driving. As Bell was driving on Babcock Boulevard, an officer saw that he was driving erratically, with his car swerving and veering off the road. Naturally, Mark Wycheck, the officer on duty who saw this, pulled Bell over, and when Bell refused to take a breathalyzer test, he was arrested. Not only was he charged with driving while intoxicated, but he was charged with blowing past a stop sign and driving with an expired registration. Genius move to break multiple crimes at the same time. It's already stupid, idiotic, and selfish enough to drive drunk, but to do it while you have an expired registration adds another layer of stupidity into the mix. So when you've already been arrested once this offseason, the last thing you should do is commit another crime and get arrested a second time. You better be on your best behavior, especially when you're already in hot water. And this is especially true for a man like Bell, who was already on thin ice due to his checker legal past. In 1980, he was convicted of simple assault when a woman in Pittsburgh claimed that he forced her to perform oral sex in the stairwell of a motel. And in 1981, he was arrested 2 times in one night after driving while intoxicated and recklessly speeding, going 106 miles per hour one way and then 94 miles per hour the other way. Bell was not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, in case you hadn't been able to figure that out by now. Or he just didn't think the law applied to him, seeing as he had more arrests than touchdowns over the last 4 months. But sure enough, Bell decided that it would be a good idea to head to Atlantic City, New Jersey. And it made sense as to why Bell would be in Atlantic City. It was the off-season, and he lived in Pennsylvania, so it was not inconceivable in the slightest bit that he'd make a drive to Atlantic City and stay there for a getaway, even though his license was automatically suspended for 6 months. Not that it stopped him from driving in Pittsburgh after he was arrested in Florida. But while in Atlantic City, he exposed himself. He was at the Tropicana, a hotel and casino in the city, and while there, he performed with a complaint described as an act of lewdness. Obviously, that's not allowed. You can't expose yourself in public. And to make matters even worse, all he had to do was show up to court on March 22nd, and he'd probably be hit with a slap on the wrist and a fine or something along those lines. Except, he didn't show up to court. He decided to dodge the court, and with that, a warrant was issued for his arrest. An act of lewdness gets you, at a maximum, 6 months in jail and a $500 fine, and odds are he was not going to jail for this. But dodging court and getting another charge added? Good job. Now it's serious stuff. At this point, you've got a man who was arrested 4 times in the span of about 4 months, a man who's been arrested every year in the 1980s, a man who supposedly learned nothing from the incident at the motel in 1980, and a man who was now dodging court. At this point, there was no way that Bell was going to be playing in the NFL in 1982. There just wasn't. Granted, there was a question of whether anyone was going to play in the NFL in 1982 for that matter due to the strike, which I've talked about many times before on this channel. So if you want to learn more about that, you can do so by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But Bell was toast. 2 arrests in a month after 2 arrests in October, plus a warrant being out for his arrest now. Playing in the NFL again was the least of his concerns. What could his possible defense be? What could Bell's possible justification for this be? How could he wiggle himself out of this one? Well, his attorney had a bizarre defense. It wasn't me. As his attorney, Kenneth Mundy, said, "You've got the wrong man. You know you've got the wrong man. If you don't know that by now, you should." Yep, that's right, the Shaggy Defense. Despite the fact that Bell was relatively close to Atlantic City, despite the fact that the description matched up, despite the fact that he had sort of been charged with the same crime before, despite the fact that he had a checkered past with the law, and despite the fact that the arrest file literally said Theo Bell, and it was reported by the police department, Bell was pleading his innocence. It wasn't me. I know all the evidence points to it being me, and they even caught it on camera with the security footage, but it wasn't me.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
In a bizarre twist of fate, the story that it wasn't him was published on April 1st. So that's a real funny joke right there. You mean to tell me it wasn't you? Come on. Well, here's where the story gets incredibly bizarre. Turns out, the Shaggy Defense actually worked. Turns out, it wasn't him. Now, everything else, that was him. The incident in 1980, the 2 arrests in 1981 for speeding and drunk driving, and the arrests back in February of 1982 for drunk driving in Pittsburgh, that was him. That was 100% him. But the Atlantic City thing, and what could have been the death knell for his professional football career, and the final nail in the coffin for a man already on thin ice, was not, in fact, Theo Bell. At least, not that Theo Bell. Turns out, this Theo Bell was a 39-year-old man who was from a different hometown than wide receiver Theo Bell was, as he was 28 years old and had never stepped foot in Atlantic City at any point in his life. Turns out, this Theo Bell wasn't actually named Theo Bell. Rather, this Theo Bell was named Kenny Bell, so he was going under a fake name. It's much like the situation that involved Denver Broncos defender Tyrone Braxton at Super Bowl 32 in San Diego, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Said Detective Ken Wicklin, "When Atlantic City Police called me up a few days ago with this, I had to laugh. This is a new twist." He added that Kenny Bell had a record with Aberdeen Township Police and was a phony, saying, "He's nothing but a flake. He'll tell you he's one thing one day and another thing another day. He tells people he's an actor, then he'll be a karate expert. A few days ago, he was a Broadway star. He's not any of those. I think he's unemployed and on welfare." In other words, this was the early 80s version of George Santos. And if you think that's the end of the story, oh no. Yes, Bell's name was cleared, but people didn't realize that. They thought that he did the thing, and some newspapers did not issue a retraction. The Associated Press got it wrong. Plain and simple, they got it wrong. They got the wrong man, and now Bell's reputation was damaged as a result. With that, 1 year later, exactly 1 year into the day that Bell's lawyer came out and said that it wasn't him, Bell sued the Associated Press for $30 million, or $10 million for each of the 3 counts. Negligence for not checking the accuracy of the story before it went to print, libel, and invasion of privacy. In fact, the lawsuit went to court in 1984, although it was dismissed by the district judge, Harold H. Green, on summary judgment. Now let's talk about the legalese of the case involving this man you've been watching the whole time, Theo Bell, for a bit. The privacy claim was always going to be complete nonsense. Bell is an athlete in the NFL playing in front of thousands of fans every week, and hundreds of thousands or even millions more on television. He's playing in the most popular sporting league in America, and he's a starter, so he is a public figure. Public figures are treated very differently than people in the private sphere when it comes to things like this. The standard is significantly higher. Bell knowingly became a public figure when he entered the NFL. He chose this life, and as a result, there are certain things that you lose the right to, and privacy is, to some extent, one of them. Even if it wasn't, this was public information via a police report. The court also found that over 100 newspaper articles about his off-the-field incidents, like the arrest earlier in 1982 and the arrests in 1980 and 1981 appeared in publications across the country prior to the Atlantic City incident here. And I can promise you, there were way more than 100 articles. That was just what they could find without the extensive search databases online we have available at our disposal today. It was in the thousands. His reputation was already in the gutter. It was unlikely that this story, considering his history, was going to make it any worse. Plus, the Associated Press's error was inadvertent. You can't blame them for reporting on this story. I know we like to bash the media a lot, but you can't blame them here. The police department said it was him. The records said it was him. All reports said it was him. The casino said it was him. He had a prior record with a similar crime, and they had the same name. The Associated Press, to be held liable, would have to have a knowing disregard for the truth. In other words, they would have had to have published the report knowing that it was falsified information. And let's be honest, 99.99999% of the time, when something like what happened in this story here happens, it's completely legit. It's not the AP's fault that it was an imposter and a man who happened to have the same name, and that the casino and the police department and records and the security footage said the same thing. It's no real surprise that this case got dismissed on summary judgment, and I could do an entire video on this case, really diving into the weeds of it and the judge's ruling, if that's something you're interested in. What's funny about this case is that I literally just learned of this case while researching this video. Seriously, I went to law school, I learned a lot of crazy cases about NFL players and defamation and sports law and everything like that, and this case never came up. I was learning this for the first time while researching this video. You learn something new every single day. It's a lot more fun to research cases when you're not forced to do it and you can't get cold on. I will say that much. If any of my law professors are watching this and you want a fun case to spice things up about defamation and public figures and NFL and whatnot, this is a fun one. Honestly, this is a pretty fun one. I think you're going to like it. As for Theo Bell, he played for the team behind me right here, the Buccaneers, until the end of the 1985 season, so he had a 10-year career in the NFL, although he would only catch 2 more touchdowns after that 1981 season. Still, 10 years in the NFL, 2 Super Bowls, solid contributor for a long period of time. That's a career that a lot of players would love to have, even if it came with, whatever the heck this whole incident was. Theo Bell did a lot of good things in the NFL, from being a solid punt returner in Pittsburgh to being a stable presence on the Buccaneers throughout the first half of the early 1980s. But he might be best known today for the thing he didn't do that a lot of people thought he did. So let this be a lesson. Sometimes, the Shaggy Defense does, in fact, work. It won't win you a $30 million lawsuit, but it will work in clearing your name. Maybe that's where Shaggy got the inspiration for that song. Who knows? But at least when it came to the incident in Atlantic City, when it came to Theo Bell, the Associated Press rang the wrong bell. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.